Hey, good evening, everyone. This is State Representative Brad Halbrook welcoming you to our Tuesday night roundtable and town hall live stream. We've joined with Representative David Freese and Representative Chris Miller and our special guest, Ted Dabrowski of WirePoints. David, welcome. Say hi, and then pass it off to Chris, and then we'll go to Ted.
Hey, glad to be here. Dave Freese for 115th.
Excellent, David. Thanks for joining us. Chris?
Hey, my name's Chris Miller, and I'm so thrilled to be here this evening to talk about some really important issues that have to do with truth, logic, and common sense, because that is where those entities live, right here. And so Ted's going to bring a lot of that to the table this evening as we go over these things. And one of the things that I farm for a living, and the farmers are rejoicing over here because the climate changed again, and we actually got some rain. And so everybody's pretty happy over here, but looking forward to the conversation tonight.
Excellent. Chris, thank you. And with that, we're going to go right to Ted Dabrowski, WirePoints. Ted, you've been on with us in the past, and you've always got a plethora of information. And again, this is a place where truth prevails in the vacuum that we call Springfield, where there is a complete lack of truth, logic, and common sense. So with that, Ted, the floor is yours. Welcome.
All right. Well, hey, thank you. And thanks for letting WirePoints be on here. We try to bring the truth. Unfortunately, in Illinois, the truth tends to be pretty negative. And so, but, you know, what it should be is inspiring to fight back. And I really like that music because I'm pumped up to talk about a big problem we have. And that's, I think we're going to see more tax hikes in Illinois. And so if that doesn't fire you up, it either means you're leaving Illinois or you don't worry about it, but you should. And so I want to talk a little bit about what's happening in the rest of the country first when it comes to taxes. And then, it gives us the power to push back with our legislators, not these on this video because they are supportive of tax cuts, but the rest of them. So let me take you through a little bit of what's happening. And listen, at WirePoints, we're trying to share the information. Mainstream media won't cover most of what we talk about. So what we rely on is people watching here to sign up for WirePoints, share information, spread it to other people. And the more signups we get on WirePoints on our daily newsletter, the more chance we have of pushing back against these damaging tax hikes. So let me hit a few slides here. Here's a quote to the good news. I'll call it the good news for a minute. The state took in $53 billion in revenues in 2023. And what we just heard from the state's budget team, it's the highest on record for the state of Illinois. So they took in lots of tax revenues. The income tax revenues for the state were way up. The sales tax revenues were way up. The corporate income taxes were way up. Everything's way up. A big part of that was all the spending from all the COVID relief money that came not just to the state, but to people, to companies, to not-for-profit. Just everybody got money, and they spent it like crazy. And that's made Illinois have the biggest budget on record, $53 billion. Let me show you how big this is and why it's triggered a whole bunch of tax cuts all over the country, but not in Illinois. So here you go. When Chris Miller came into office, Chris, was that 2019?
Yes. Yeah.
The proposed budget for Illinois was just $38 billion, $37.9 billion.
All right.
It is up to $53 billion. So that's an increase of what is that? 38. That's $15 billion in just 4 years. That's a 40% increase. So our government is holding 40% more money than it did just 4 years ago. 9% a year growth. Now, here's my problem with all this. That's what the state is taking in a huge amount more. Most people haven't seen a 9% increase in their salaries. Most people haven't seen increases at all. And so they've seen a destruction in the money they have because of inflation. And so here you've got this government with record money, people who are struggling to meet their bills, pay taxes, meet their daily obligations. And so the government has all this money, and what the heck are they doing with it, right? Are they going to give some of it back to taxpayers? Well, hell no. The chart that we have here, and you guys jump in anytime you want.
I have a question.
Mm-hmm.
And trying to get squared in my mind is we have this, what do you say, 53 billion generated in revenue, but at the same time, we've lost a congressional seat, and we've had multiple businesses leave our state. And so is this increase due to inflation and the cost and the increased cost of goods and services, or how's that all work?
Yes. So the way it happened is that, so the federal government has spent over $12 trillion. It's hard to imagine what that number means, but $12 trillion. It's about half of the yearly output of the whole country. They spent $12 trillion over those 3 years of COVID, handing out money to companies, to states, to local governments, to people, right? Remember all those stimulus checks we all got. And people have been holding that money and spending that money for the last 2 and 3 years. And so, Governor Pritzker will act like he did something really good for the economy. He made all these reforms. And he tries to say that he did all that. The fact of the matter is, the state legislature has done nothing positive to make Illinois grow. All this increased revenue in sales tax revenues, income tax revenues, capital gains tax revenues, it's all from people having all this short-term money that they spent. And so it wasn't like the real economy growing. Part of that is inflation, and part of that is just all that extra money. And so, and it's not just Illinois that had that, right? All states in the country had it. We needed the bailout, and I don't mean that positively, but we needed the bailout. A lot of other states, it was just like free money, and so that's why so many states are doing tax cuts. So I hope I answered your question.
So looking at I'm sorry, Ted. Looking at the graphic you got there, Illinois not going to have any tax cuts or tax reform. And we have states there that have implemented tax cuts or zero income tax. We obviously have an out-migration problem in our state.
Mm-hmm.
Don't want to assume this, but is it safe to assume that the people leaving the state of Illinois are going to those states where they either have no state income tax or have implemented some kind of state tax reform?
Yeah, no, absolutely. There's very few people moving from Illinois to California, for example, or whatever. The big numbers of people leaving Illinois is Florida, Texas, and number 3 is Indiana. So, our neighboring states are taking people away from us, and they've all moved to lower taxes. Let me take you through that, and I'll answer your question that way. So this graphic, for those of you who haven't seen it in one of our recent reports, 24 states in the last 3 years, since 2021, have cut taxes permanently. A lot of them have done major tax reform. So 24, 8 states can't cut their taxes because they're already at zero. That's Florida, that's Tennessee, that's Texas. And Illinois stands out like a sore thumb, especially around its neighbors, because we haven't done anything. If anything, Pritzker tried to pass the progressive tax, and I think they'll be back. So this is the big problem. And let me show you how competitive our neighbors are getting versus us. So start with progressive Iowa. Iowa had progressive taxes, which is what Pritzker wants to move Illinois to. Well, Iowa has dumped its progressive tax scheme and is transitioning to a flat tax rate of 3.9%. So compare that. That's already lower than today's Illinois flat tax at 4.95. So Iowa going lower than we are. Michigan is cutting to 4.05. Indiana cutting to 3.15. Kentucky cutting to 4.5. Missouri still has a progressive tax scheme, but its top bracket is at 4.95. So that's already, when you take in the lower brackets, it's already more competitive than Illinois. So the last one left is Wisconsin, which is trying to bring down taxes. They brought down their second highest bracket to 5.3%. So all of our nearby states are aggressively taking steps to lower taxes and become more competitive. They want to compete with the rest of the country, not Illinois. We're still going backwards. So I hope I answered your question, David.
Yes, you did. Appreciate that.
Mm-hmm. So this is, everybody should be armed with either this graphic or this data when they talk to their legislators, when they talk to their friends, or when they're, when they're talking to somebody who's on the other side, maybe persuadable though. They can be moved by some of this stuff where we are the extreme outlier here. We're the outlier. We're going the wrong way. And, we have all kinds of data that tells us this. Kiplinger is a financial company, financial reporting and data company. And, they've run it. And every year for the last few years, we've been the least tax-friendly state for middle-class families. So, that's it's a simple reason why people are leaving to go to some of these other zero tax states or just more friendly states. Now, another reason why we're going to see tax hikes is because this ugly pension problem that we have in Illinois. We were having some extreme problems right before COVID with pensions because we didn't know how we're going to keep paying this stuff off. Well, the whole discussion died off for 3 years because when all that federal money came in, it took off all the pressure off of Governor Pritzker and state people managing this. So this problem kind of quietly disappeared, but here it comes back. And we have the biggest pension crisis in the country. Chicago's is far deeper. And so you're going to hear talk about figuring out how to handle these things. In particular, I thought I had a Chicago. I do have a Chicago pension. So this is a simple graphic. It's not a simple graphic. Sorry. Let me see if I can make it simple. And this is why we should be cautious. A lot of people wonder why we talk about Chicago a lot. Well, we talk about Chicago a lot because downstaters are asked to bail it out quite often, and this will be the next bailout. So the Chicago pensions are running out of money. Take the firefighters fund. If you look at how much money it has compared to a annual year of payouts, pension payouts has to make, the Chicago pension fund has only 3.4 years left of money in its system. Now, this ignores that new money is going to come in every year, but it's a measure of like how much money is there in the accounts to pay out for future payouts. It's only got 3.4 years left of money. Compare that to the Los Angeles in purple. Los Angeles Police and Fire Fund has 20 years of assets to pay, they can be used to pay out. So it shows you how sick they are. There are no funds sicker than Chicago's except for one Kentucky fund. The Kentucky State Fund is sicker than these, but there's going to be a problem. It all depends on whether there's a recession. We have to see how the crime situation plays out in Chicago. We have to see whether people come back into the buildings. Are people going to take the trains back into the city? We don't know. But the bigger the problems get in Chicago, the more they're going to look for state money. And that's why I warn you guys to be aware of this, because this is one of the pushbacks you would make. And this would be one of the things you have to inform your persuadable left friends who might think that, what's the big deal? Another little tax hike.
So, Ted, what is the current trend for Chicago office spaces? Are they still vacant? What's that at right now?
Yeah, so it's interesting. So right now, what they call the lease rate is still about 80% leased, meaning 20% occupancy. So that sounds not too bad. But there's a company called Castle, which does the card swipes, and they measure card swipes. And what you'll find there is that the number of people actually swiping into the buildings is about 50%. So that's the big concern, because when the leases run out over the next couple of years, if these companies only lease half of the space instead of the current amount of space they're using, that means that the valuations for all those big buildings will go down. And if the valuations go down, that means the tax revenues go down for the city. And that means two things: either they hike massively taxes on residential, which is already becoming a big problem, or they start looking for other sources of money coming to the state, asking for the rest of the state to help bail it out. So that's the big risk. But if those buildings don't fill up faster, they're calling it the doom loop. The doom loop is where not enough people come into Chicago. The trains are half empty.
Right.
The restaurants aren't used. The buildings are empty. Tax revenues go down. Services go down, and you're spiraling then. So that's the fear. San Francisco's kind of in that right now. We're watching San Francisco to see how that plays out. But Chicago has to be really careful.
Is our new Chicago mayor aware of this, and he has a plan to address this?
No way. Right now, if we see anything, there's no plan to address it. He wants more spending. He wants more taxes. He's talked about spending $800 million to $1 billion more. He thinks he's going to get different kinds of taxes that would require state approval, like a financial transaction tax on all the Chicago Mercantile Exchange, for example. Yeah. But I think he's going to probably have a hard time getting that from the state legislature. And if he can't get that, then he's going to have to do property tax hikes, which will again just spiral. And my big concern is that he's got no plan on crime, and he's done nothing to enhance policing. He's done nothing to push for more prosecutions. He's done nothing to criticize how poorly we sentence, and so therefore he's looking more to just spend money on programs. And if that doesn't happen, the Chicago economic engine is in big trouble, and that of course means Illinois is in trouble.
Right. And today, Ted, we see news, $30 million coming from a Department of Human Services, I believe, for peacekeepers. So evidently that's their solution to solve the crime problem that is plaguing the new mayor at an unbelievable rate. So more programs, no common sense solutions, it looks like to me.
No, it's even the opposite of common sense, because you can imagine the corruption in Illinois. You can imagine, and I don't mean to disparage every group, because I'm sure there's some groups that have great intentions and good people. But if you understand how corruption works in Illinois, and in Chicago in particular, you're handing out money to groups that aren't proven, impossible to track. Mm-hmm. We don't really know if their stuff works or not. It could take forever. And in the meantime, we're not policing, we're not prosecuting, we're not sentencing. So crime continues to be bad. The mayor's initial words were things like these are just kids being kids, things like that. And he's made a lot of big mistakes on how he's talked about crime. I think the next big mistakes are these handing out, tens and hundreds of millions of dollars with no solution.
Right.
So I apologize for being so negative, but that's just the reality. Chris, you had talked about businesses moving out. We got to be really, really careful. I argue that we're going to figure things out for Illinois in the next, whatever it is, 5 to 10 years. We'll figure it out somehow. Yeah. Somehow the insanity will be replaced by common sense and sanity. But in the meantime, what we have to be careful of is that we don't lose too many companies, too many of our assets, too many of our smart people, too much of our tax base. And the Wall Street Journal just came out with this recently. And this is a new report that we had never run at WirePoints. But the Bureau of Labor Statistics is starting to track the movement of companies, just like they track the movement of people. Now they're tracking the movement of companies. And these are single establishment firms. Illinois was the third biggest loser of companies. Yeah. Literally, companies that were established in Illinois one year, and the next year, in 2020, they were in Illinois. The next year, they were in another state. Third biggest loser, New York and California, number one and number two. When you do this on a per capita basis, we're the second biggest loser. So this is the big fear for me, is that we lose our talent and our tax base before we get a chance to get control of our state again.
Well, that's a real problem, because once people leave, I mean, it would really, really, really take a lot of incentives to get them come back, just because it's such a pain in the butt to pull up and move. I know that we lost. I was trying to Google why we were talking there, but there was some company just left this past week, and I know that it had 500 just regular rank and file employees, and then there was 400 executives. Mm-hmm. I can't remember which. Do you happen to know who that was?
What kind of company?
Well, I can't. I was trying to look it up because I know I read it this week, but I can't remember who it was. But they, there was 400 executives in the Chicagoland area. They got laid off, and there was 500 other workers that but I can't remember who it was.
Yeah, I'm not recalling that.
Well, so I think it was Walgreens says they're laying off.
It was Walgreens.
Closing the distribution center in Southern Illinois. The company's laying off nearly 400 employees at its e-commerce site at Edwardsville. And then 500 corporate employees in Chicago and Deerfield. And it's going to close 150 stores across the nation. So that's pretty big. Another big hit to Chicagoland. And Edwardsville is just 2 hours southwest of where I'm at. So it's hitting across the state.
That problem was near and dear to me because, of course, I have my knee replaced and you have pain meds, and I ran out of pain meds over the weekend, and no Walgreens pharmacy is open. So I suffered through the weekend before we were able to do that. And of course, we had the 4th of July. And of course, the pharmacy was closed again. And so that's the reason why the Walgreens layoffs really hit close to home with me.
Yeah, I mean, Chris, that's a real life issue, and that same thing happened with Walmart in Chicago. Walmart had 8 stores in Illinois, 4 of them which in the Chicago area. They shut them down,
Right.
and there's a lot of people who rely on the pharmacy for that. Being able to get low price and availability,
Right.
and just like you, they were shut out just like that. And again, that they blamed it on the lack of economics, but what we know is that a lot of it is just that whole shoplifting and crime, where
Right.
it didn't make sense for them to do business.
Right.
Ted, I'm sure you got a lot of slides here. Ted, is there any solutions in your slides? I mean, we can talk about some of this stuff. We're 20 minutes into the program here. What do you think? You're talking about these neighboring states lowering taxes. 8 states have no taxes or no income tax.
Mm-hmm.
What have you got a slide that speaks of that, or anything else that we can kind of drill into policy matters here?
Yeah, no, and maybe I will next time, because I have a lot of solutions. But I think the problem we're running into is that the mainstream media doesn't tell the truth about what's happening. And if you listen to here's my big problem. We have to win 2 parts of the war. The first part is to convince people that what they hear from the mainstream media is not right, and then the second part is that here's a solution. So right now, if you open up the papers and hear Pritzker saying we have record revenues, they did the best management of COVID. Look at they've turned around the numbers, they've paid down the unpaid bills, they've got a couple credit rating upgrades and all that, and that's what dominates the press. And so we struggle because when a center left person who doesn't hear, let's call it alternative news, right? When they don't hear something outside of NBC5 or the Chicago. They think everything's fine and that we're the problem makers. So what we need to do is to be persuasive with the actual data. Now, I know a lot of people who follow you guys already know a lot of these things, so they don't necessarily need to be persuaded. But our big task is to persuade our next door neighbor or our friends who are center left, who are persuadable, in a way that we bring them around to support the reform. So that's problem number 1. Problem number 2 is these are big reforms, and I'll tell you what drives everything, in my opinion. Number 1, we have to bring the individual back to the center of policy in Illinois. The God-given rights of the individual, not this group identity. This group identity stuff is killing us because it's forcing money to be spent in certain ways. It's forcing bad policy. Every time you hear Pritzker or it was Lightfoot at the time or Johnson, they all talk about equity. And equity means no merit, no measurement, no accomplishment. It's all about moving monies in different ways that have nothing to do with reality or common sense. So for me, we have to start stripping wherever the word equity is put, we have to strip that and get back to the individual. So once we get to that and we understand that individual is the key, then we need to look at what things are anti-individual in Illinois. Well, number 1 is this pension stuff. We got 2 classes of workers. The protected class, constitutionally protected. Mm-hmm. They've got guaranteed pensions, guaranteed contracts, guaranteed raises, all that stuff. And then the ordinary person doesn't get any of that. I mean, it has the opposite of that. They have nothing guaranteed. They have no pension protection. They have no job protection, contract protection. So that Amendment 1, that pension clause, they need to be wiped out. Now, those are big lifts. And they're not going to happen tomorrow. They're certainly not going to happen under this government. But you got to change the pension protection clause. You got to get rid of Amendment 1. We could talk about that for a long time on each one. The other thing is that within that, the only way we're going to get property taxes down is if we strip the public sector unions of all those powers. They have so many powers, and we have none. And one thing I was going to show you in a minute, or I was going to show you, is Pritzker is negotiating with AFSCME right now. And apparently AFSCME, again, the biggest public sector union in the state, they've agreed on a contract. Well, guess what the Illinois laws say? The Illinois law says that their negotiations between the government and the union, the public sector union, are confidential and secret until they've agreed. And only then can we, the taxpayers, find out. Well, that's a law that should be changed tomorrow, because otherwise, they've agreed to something. They agree to big raises. We don't know, and we just have to. They just slam it down our throat. So I could go on and on about the kind of changes we need. I tell you, my favorite, simplest one would be one that says, starting tomorrow, we have no more pensions for all new workers, and we
Right.
move to a 401k style account.
Right.
That would send the biggest message because it's constitutional. It can be done tomorrow. Make it a good, fair one. We have plenty of ideas of how to do that. But that would be a great start because it would be the beginning of the end of pensions. We can't continue to do pensions the way we do them.
Right. And that's something I've said since day one is protect what people have already earned and where they're at. But day one, new employees, new hires have to go into a 401k, and this thing will eventually cure itself over time. But that seems to fall on deaf ears. You know, they said, well, we have the tier 2 system that's been in place for 12 years now, 12, 13 years. But yet, guys, we see tier 2 fixes. I wish we need to get a count on how many tier 2 fixes we saw in the General Assembly this spring. And I think they're going to have tier 2 looking just like tier 1 if we go much longer.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. Yeah, they're going to keep increasing benefits. The hole's going to get bigger, and they're going to do it all in the name of fairness that the tier 2 guys are getting too little compared to the tier 1. Well, the tier 1 benefits are still massive.
Right. Right.
I think that's one of the biggest challenges we face is getting very clear, accurate information because J.B. Pritzker and the radical left, they lie with impunity because they know no one's going to hold their feet to the fire. You know, it's just like every year since I've been there, J.B. Pritzker has tried to say, "Oh, we got a balanced budget again," and I keep waiting for Tinker Bell and Peter Pan to fly around the General Assembly. There's sprinkling pixie dust. I mean, but nobody ever questions it. It's just like, oh, it must be true because JB said it.
It's just magic.
Yeah, and that's the problem. Everybody believes it, or nobody challenges it, and it goes on. And you know, ordinary people who don't pay enough attention just either accept it or don't know. I'll tell you the one other big thing that has to change in Illinois, because that's where all the money goes. We'll never lower property taxes as long as we're spending as much as we do on education.
Right.
And that 2017 bill that the Governor Rauner signed and pushed was the most disastrous. That evidence-based funding. I don't like to use the word lie because it sounds too hyperbolic, but it was the biggest lie on Illinoisans, I think, by far, even though Amendment 1 was maybe bigger. We're spending so much on education and there's zero accountability. And the thing is that their evidence-based funding model keeps saying they need more. They need billions more. And so that's where all our property tax revenues, the majority, 60% or 70%, depending on where you live, of your property tax bill is going to education. And we're spending more and more. The results are horrendous. Our kids can't read anymore. They can't do math. And it's all done under this pretense of this evidence-based funding formula, which is a corrupted mess. And I would unwind that tomorrow.
Right. Well, we spent a great deal of time talking about this back in the spring. We need to probably revisit this again, right, Ted? I think it's over $10 billion. It was under $10 billion. And that's just the state's contribution. That's not the 60 or 65% coming from real estate taxes. That's
Correct.
not federal dollars that's coming in. I mean, we've got schools that are spending $15,000, $20,000, $30,000, $40,000 per student. And you've got 2/3 of them or more that can't read or do math at grade level. It's just stunning what's going on.
Yeah, so this is why I was going to warn you about tax hikes again. I think my major focus today was kind of warn about tax hikes and get you fired to be thinking about that.
Right.
This is Chicago Public Schools. In the last 6 years, spending per student has almost doubled, and yet if you look at Black student SAT reading proficiency has collapsed from 2 out of 10 kids could read at grade level to just 1 out of 10. Right. And here they're saying they want more money, and they don't want it through property taxes. They want it through more state money, and more state money means Effingham and Carbondale and Rockford. Everybody else putting in more money that goes into CPS. So this is the big watch out, because this is the big lie that's going on. And what's going to happen, by the way, is they're going to want more money, but they want to start removing the actual testing and the actual measurement. So that way they can just say we're spending, we're doing a great job, even though you can't measure it.
Exactly.
So big reforms on education, guys.
Yeah,
Huge.
exactly. With that, let's kind of wind this down to be sensitive to everybody's time so that we'll not only be live tonight, but hopefully in demand in the future. So with that, David, Representative Freeze, any closing thoughts or questions or comments real quick as we wind this down? Oh, you're muted, Dave.
I've been doing this long enough. You think I would remember to do that? I just want to thanks Ted for coming on. Very educational. Love reading your stuff, and look forward to working out some of these issues with you, coming up with some good solutions.
Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right, Chris.
Oh, thanks for coming on, Ted. Thank you, Brad, for putting this together. And I know that it's important that we continue to take the message to the people, because this is one of the few places where they're going to actually hear the truth in real time with real numbers, and also hopefully down the road with some real solutions. But I think one of the things that we have to do is we have to tell the bad news before we can get to the good news. And so the good news is there are solutions, but we're going to have to roll up our sleeves. We're going to have to quit living in fantasy land and pretending like that we don't have a major problem, because we have a mess. And it's all been self-inflicted, and so it's been created through bad public policy, and so it can be fixed through good public policy. So don't lose heart, but like and share our content and help us spread the word.
Yeah, exactly. And Ted, I'll bring your website and the code up here. Ted, we'll just let you close us out, and then we'll go to close. Thank you.
Fantastic. Yeah, and Brad, also, we can at any point we can focus on one solution, for example, on a certain problem. That'd be fun too, to dig into the solution set. We'd love to do that. Just so wirepoints.org, please follow us. This code here should take you to our newsletter sign up, and we'd love to have more people sign up and share. It's the only way to get this truth out. And thank you all for your time, and shoot us with any questions. Thank you.
Excellent. Ted, thank you. Thank you guys for joining us. Until we meet again, with that, we will see you all real soon. Like, share, and follow and subscribe to our content. We would appreciate it. Talk to you soon, guys.
Thank you, guys.
All right. Great, Ted. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm just, it's been a couple days since I'd used this program, and they've made some changes since I was last on. So anyhow, I'm just kind of looking that over. Anyhow, great stuff. We'll get it set up and it'll go out tonight at 7:00.
Yeah. And Brad, let's talk about next time, we can focus on a couple key solutions so we can dig in, and that'll help people.
Right.
Good.
Yep. Excellent.
Chris, thank you. Hey, and I'll come back to you on a date. I really appreciate you. I'd like to come down and visit, as I said. So.
Okay. All right. Well, I know it's just kind of a busy kind of a deal here. So, I mean, just summer. So anyhow, we'll make it work. All right. Ted, thank you.
Take care. Thanks, Chris.
Yep. See you guys.
Thanks, Ted.